So, usually when people talk about street photography, you think of a lot of big places like New York, places in California, Tokyo, really picturesque urban environments, right? And then sometimes when people say that they're doing a small town shoot, it's usually like a suburb of Atlanta or a suburb of New York, somewhere a little bit quieter, technically small town compared to its neighbor, but not really. But what if you're like me and you live in an actual, like, really small town and you live near other small towns, but you're not quite sure how to go after doing street photography? If you'd like to see me do an actual video on the spot explaining my process of when I take these photos in these small towns, leave a comment down below and I'll let you know when that's coming up. I'm pretty much thinking about doing that after doing this most recent shoot that I did in Clayton, but I want to know what you guys think and if there's anything that you'd like me to try and address in that video. So today I'm going to be covering 4 photos from over the years that I've taken in some of the small towns that I've lived in. I'm going to be talking about Elon, North Carolina, Clayton, North Carolina, Garner, North Carolina, and even though it's not small, it's still a lot smaller than a lot of bigger urban areas, Raleigh, North Carolina. So without further ado, we're going to start with one of my older photos that I took on my old Canon Rebel T3i. And this one was in Elon, North Carolina. So where I lived was really close to the university. And during the fall, it was extremely beautiful, which is kind of a stereotype for a lot of places here in North Carolina. The fall-autumn season is extremely beautiful when it's transitioning between summer and winter. So this first photo is at the campus in Elon. And I was just wandering around and I was just like, I had no idea what I was doing. Earlier in that day, I'd been taking like close-ups of the leaves and some parks nearby, but there wasn't any students here at this time. It was kind of cool living next to a small college and being around when the students weren't there. And so I was just wandering around, and I saw this archway that had this really cool view of a tree. But the thing I love the most about it is it's not completely symmetrical. Like I said, this is an early photo of mine too, so I didn't even know how to like straighten photos as much. And also the editing in this, I want to note, is from the original. I don't have the old RAW files for this anymore, so I can't go back and tweak it the way I would now. But honestly, I love looking at it, how I captured it in that moment. Obviously, something that's stuck with me all over these years is deep contrast, which I kind of buck a little bit in some of the photos coming up, but for the most part, I love a deep contrast. It's just something that appeals to me. This really captures the transition of seasons here in North Carolina and when I was witnessing, because you still have the green grass, you still have bits of the tree and the bushes that are green, and that has a stark contrast to the orange. Now obviously the brick is a little bit more orange, it's a little more red, but that's just kind of that color that you see here. And the orange and the yellow in the trees is a nice contrast. The sky is kind of light because it was starting to clear out a little bit that day, but it had just finished raining and it was still a little sprinkly. So this was actually a really good spot because I didn't want to damage my camera because I didn't have much money at the time, and I wanted to go out and shoot in gloomy conditions. And now even with my expensive cameras, I'm like, yeah, I want to shoot in like adverse conditions. Since the beginning, I've been kind of challenging myself to do that. How I found this was just kind of wandering around the campus. And so the next time you're on campus or you're around somewhere, just take a walk around and honestly pick a day that isn't a completely clear day, and you'll notice how much the texture pops. Because you can kind of see, if this was just plain dry brick, it would look interesting. But because it was recently wet, it's still wet in this photo, you can see the reflection of the tree, you can see the branches, you can see the leaves in it. It's very expressive, and you can kind of even see the building behind it. It's a very interesting, just textured photo all around. And like I said, small town, small college, and this is me as a total beginner too. I mean, I couldn't have had my camera for much longer than 2 months at this point. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of figuring it out. So on to this next photo. Now, remember what I said about deep contrast? Now, there is kind of some deep contrast in this, but I bucked at it a little bit. So this was actually my most recent photo of all of these. 2 weeks ago, did a photo shoot with my buddy Justin, and I'll link his channel down below. We were kind of collaborating on some video work for him as well as some for me, and one of the things I was doing was challenging myself for this video to do small town photography. And it was empty at this time of day. We went on a Sunday, and it was kind of around 6 or 7 at night, so the sun hadn't quite set enough to have that golden hour yet, and it wasn't dark enough to have some of the cool neon lights, which there aren't a lot, but they pop out when they're there. But I really liked this composition because as much as I love expressive clouds, and this is why I really love really gloomy days, because you get the deep clouds and you get the wet textures on the ground. But this one really stuck out to me because this gave this real empty feeling that people typically associate with small towns, at least here in the United States. There's a lot of brick buildings, much like what I said on the Elon photo, and there also wasn't a lot of cars at this point, but I actually didn't mind having this one car in the photo because that night, it actually got really bumping. There was tons of cars and people were out, but when Justin and I came out at this point, there was like no one there. I love this because it has kind of a dry feel to it. So here in North Carolina, obviously, it's not a desert region, especially here in the Piedmont, but I liked that kind of dry feeling because it was really dry that day. It was still really, really hot. We were gonna like put on hoodies for like promotional photos so that way we could like look cool in long sleeves and pants, and it was so hot. I mean, it must have still been like low 90 degrees. So what I really like about this is it's following a direction. So this is very similar to the Elon photo where it's curving to the left. And in this case, it's going diagonally to the left. The car's pointed that way, the buildings are pointed that way, the road is pointing in the same direction but upwards. The sun is beating down on the brick, but because of the buildings that are on the other side of the building, it's cutting off a little bit, so the car is really dark. And when I look at this composition, I'm like, yeah, this is definitely what I think of when I think of like small town. It's like a small local spot next to another small local spot that doesn't look as lively sometimes on like certain days, and then you might have a car or two parked here and there. But I really love this photo. It was a challenge that day to get really good photos, and I might show more later. I decided not to post them on my Instagram because I wasn't sure, but at least on this I wanted to kind of show off the challenge itself. So the third one on my photo is actually close to where I live right now in Garner. So this one, I want to preface by saying I did not put the pail here. The bucket was already where it was, and I actually color corrected this just a little bit. I don't like to do too much sometimes nowadays, but it was a little too orange for my taste. It was almost like if you had seen me unedited, you would have thought that I was going for the orange and blue look in post-processing. So I removed that and actually gave it a little bit more of that realistic feel of what I saw, but it really was kind of orangey. It had just snowed a couple days before this photo. So in other photos you can see bits and pieces of like small snow here and there, but a lot of it had just melted. And there's lots of really cool pools. And I did some close-ups of the water. I did some close-ups of like other parts of the building, but the ones that I really liked were these photos of the bucket. I liked how it was kind of in this random spot, but it was almost like someone had positioned it almost perfectly center in the sidewalk, and now I'm sounding suspicious like I put it there, but I totally didn't. And I really love, again, that contrast. And this is why it's not a gloomy day here. This is like, I just missed golden hour, and I wanted to shoot a golden hour actually, and I missed it. Crap. But I actually really liked this kind of blue hour, dark, this like twilight kind of thing. This was maybe like 7, 8 at night. I liked how there was all these reflections, and I wanted to capture that. And I think you really get a sense of that in all the objects in this picture. You know, the brick is its own color, but you get little glints of blue because of the reflection of the water. On the bucket itself, it's obviously a gray metal bucket. You know, it's about as dark as you see it in the photo, but you see like light, but you also get a little bit of headlight from the reflection of the building next to it, so it's getting blue. And then I love, love, love the puddle in the front because it was split. It had that light blue color on the left and that orangey color on the right, and it was there's so much color complements here, and it contrasts really well. I love it, love it, love it. This is even smaller than Clayton. Like this little strip of downtown Garner is tiny. I would love to see it grow, of course, but I mean, it is really tiny. It's only a couple businesses on this one little strip along this next to on the other side of Railroad, and it's nice. I like it, and there was no one there. There were a couple people in some buildings. You can see some cars in the background. There was one business that was open at this time. Yeah, I just loved capturing that, and I love re-editing this one, but this has been my favorite edit so far, and I'll probably end up keeping at least this photo. And this is something that can be in any small town. Like, it doesn't have to be a certain size. I mean, you could technically find this in a really big city as well, but like the no people, the kind of, most businesses were closed at this point, the uniform lights with little downtown blank signs and a few cars, it just feels very cozy and small. So this last one, this is where my fib was just a little bit about small town photography, but I'm not completely going against what I'm talking about. So my hometown, and also the city that I live closest to, is Raleigh. And while it is not small, technically, it is a smaller town. It is no Atlanta, but Raleigh has a kind of like very homey feel for being a city. I went out on sometime this summer and was just taking some photos of some friends and just taking some architectural photos. And there's this one building that this spot in particular gets shot a lot. So on the other side, there's this massive building that has a huge glass facade and some LED ads on it. There's a lot of green around it. There's a lot of green in it that is in front of the entrance to the building, and also some businesses around there. And a lot of people take photos around here. I see models there all the time. I see people do some skate shops there. It's not far from a lot of things. The train station is, if you look to the left and you keep going that way, it's right there. The brick facade of this was really cool because it was painted over, and then over time, the paint obviously has moved away to show the red brick underneath it. And I just sat here for a minute because my friends were taking some pictures of stuff behind me. I was taking pictures. There's a Segway tour actually, and I got a picture of it, thought it was kind of silly, and then they cleared, and I was just about to leave, and this one woman, it's like one of those things where you're like, it was so worth it to just stand there and wait for someone to come out. I saw this woman walking by, and I just grabbed it. I got one photo. I didn't even burst it. I just risked it. And while the perspective isn't perfect of the window and everything, I love how they're opposite directions. Showing a little bit of that brick, the cars, those are the only two cars that were there, but there wasn't a lot of people there. The businesses were closed at the time. You get little bits and pieces of the window units that are definitely aging. The windows you can hardly see through, and this is contrasting right behind me, a way more modern building. So again, even though this isn't perfectly small town, it's still a smaller city. And you do really have to be creative to find those shots that really capture the more cozy, familiar parts of a downtown. So some closing thoughts I'd like to throw out there for this video. Like I said, I would love to try again and actually do an in-the-moment photo shoot and kind of tell you guys what my perspective is and why I shot the picture I did. If that's something that's interesting to you, just leave a comment down below and let me know. But with this, I looked all over YouTube for ideas on, okay, how do you shoot street photography when you live somewhere that's no one really lives, or there's no real downtown, or. Like, I just kept looking at these things, and again, I kept seeing huge city examples, or people who lived on the edge of really, really big cities, and not knocking that because they did a phenomenal job of finding the smaller, like the spots only locals would know, so that makes sense. Or you might even have the perspective of, man, the only way I can do street photography is if I go to these big cities like Tokyo, like London, like New York. I'm never gonna get good street photography without it. But that was the challenge I was having. I was like, well, I could, pack up my car and drive, anywhere from 6 to 8 hours to go get like real big city downtown photography, but I just didn't want to. And I wanted to challenge myself. I was like, what could I do that was close? Honestly, one of the biggest advice I can give in this moment is just go do it. Like, I know that's kind of a cliche with, photography, with any kind of skill set, is just go out and do it. But I'm being serious. Like, just like grab your camera, play around with some settings, and I was just doing run and gun. I was using one lens the whole time. In all of these examples, I was using one lens. Nifty 50 on the first one, which I'm surprised I got such a clean thing with it. I was just messing around. On the Clayton one, I was using my Sigma 30mm lens on my Sony A3, which you're watching on right now. On the Garner one, also on the Sony A7 III, also with 30mm. And then this one, I believe this was taken with the lens that's on it right now, which is a 16mm Sony pancake lens. I just made it simple for myself. And that would be my next piece of advice, is just keep it simple. And don't worry about what other YouTubers, other Instagram, obviously you want to build it up to be something you like, and you want to put thought into it. You don't want to only just shoot, but don't be afraid to just shoot. Like, you see something cool, go for it. If you see something that's been done before, go for it. If there's people in your area who've taken photos of that same spot, take that shot, because your perspective may still be different. You may color edit it different. You may be there at a different time. It doesn't matter. And I just want people to feel like they're not as discouraged as I was when I started doing these photos, because street photography is not really my biggest thing. And to be honest, I really don't know what my style is outside of concert photography. Everything else has just been improvisation for me. Improv. Everything has been improv for me up to this point. Street photography, travel photography, nature. I did one wedding. I did some engagement shoots. I did portrait shots. A lot of it was kind of experimental outside of concert photography. That's what I knew. That's why I picked up a camera in the first place. Really just be yourself about it, and don't be discouraged that you live in a smaller town and you can't get those cool Tokyo shots that you see on YouTube that get millions and millions of views and like have super color graded like photos and like perfect Instagram grid, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm telling you guys what I should be telling myself, which is just get out and create. Just do it. These are shots that I think I will always look back on and say, I loved these. I'm glad I took the time to work on these. And even though, especially with the Clayton one, I was extremely indecisive of how I wanted to color edit it, I was just like, whatever, man. Just get out there and do it. And I'm glad I did. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys hit me with a subscribe, give it a thumbs up if you liked the video, leave a comment if you noticed anything you might have not thought about before in this photo set, or if there's anything you'd like to see when I do eventually do a more comprehensive tutorial on street photography in small towns. Just, you know, give me some feedback, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day or evening, depending on what time you're watching, and I will see you next time.